Hello and welcome to the Leathercraft Masterclass tool reviews. And in this review I'm going to be talking about another cornerstone of traditional leathercraft with regards to tools, that is. In the last review I talked about the titanium awl made by Jerome David in France. In this review it's another French tool. It's by Vergez Blanchard and it's one of their specialist skiving knives. Now this isn't just one of their run-of-the-mill skiving knives. This is using high-speed steel, so HSS steel, which is normally seen on things like drill bits because it's a very tough, very hard material and it can be brought up to very high hardness. So this is the skiving knife that I'm talking about. Off the bat, it's a very good skiving knife. There are some pros and cons to it, which I'll be discussing. I will say I think Blanchard gets a bit of a bad rap with regards to people who buy their tools expecting more modern standards. Now, years ago, you know, tool makers like George Barnsley, which is this skiving knife here, Dixon's will be another example, and Blanchard as well, would make tools for the craftsman who was very proficient in how to sharpen and how to bring up an edge onto a blade. Now, fast forward to today, most modern manufacturers, especially new ones that have popped up along the way, will sharpen these and hone these pretty much ready to skive right out of the box. Now, people who have become accustomed to this will then buy a Blanchard tool and then wonder why it's not sharp and it has a mere serving suggestion of a blade put onto it. It does require some work to get a blade on something like this, especially with high-speed steel being so tough and abrasion resistant. I'm not going to lie, it is a challenge to get it to a skiving level of sharpness. Probably took about half an hour, 45 minutes to get the edge up to something that was decent enough to then start working on the strop with some compound. And then a few minutes on there and it was ready to go, very sharp. But to get it there requires some knowledge of sharpening, and not everybody has that. And I think the lack of an edge, or the fact that tools aren't always ready to go, is one of the reasons why people have been complaining about Blanchard, saying that they're going downhill. I'm not so sure that they are. I think standards are changing and expectations are changing from people who are buying these tools. And another issue is a lot of these tools, Blanchard tools, perhaps not this high-speed steel edition, but a lot of these tools are made just for thin, soft skins like chrome tan, for example. A lot of fine French leatherwork is focused on chrome tan leathers, retanned leathers, but especially soft and sometimes thin skins. So the angles that they choose for the bevel on their blade, usually a single bevel, is normally around 12 to 13 degrees. So if you take these knives, sharpen them up and hone them up, ready to go, and then try and push them through some thick veg tan, you might find that it loses its edge rather quickly. Vegetable tan leather is rather abrasive to steel. This is one of the reasons why you can actually strop a blade on just a thick piece of hide. If you just sand the surface on the grain side, you can actually, once it's been done on compound, you can maintain an edge just with leather. So it is mildly abrasive to steel. So if you take these 12-degree Blanchard knives and they're using a tool steel that is probably not much more than a 55 Rockwell in hardness, this is probably 60 or above, then take it through some veg tan and you're wondering why the edge is going very quickly. Although Blanchard make tools for use on vegetable tan leather, which is most of their saddlery tools, not all of their skiving knives are designed for saddlery. Many of them are in fact designed for fine French leatherwork. So I think their steel gets a bad rap because the angle on their blades is kept so low so that you can pair very thin shavings. But that's just my opinion on it. I haven't necessarily seen a reduction in quality in Blanchard. Your experiences might be different, but I think expectations are changing, and Blanchard is 200 years old or thereabouts, so they're not really changing with the times, if you know what I mean. I'm sure they could if they wanted to, but to keep costs down, it takes up a lot of time to get an edge ready to skive. Moving on to the pros of this before we move on to the cons, I find that the steel is exceptional on this. The high-speed steel on this holds a ridiculous edge, very, very fine edge. It pops hairs before the blade even touches any skin. It catches the hairs. It's shaving sharp, quite literally. It also holds an edge for a long period of time. Now, I don't mind periodical stropping. I prefer to strop a blade before it loses its edge, so I'm constantly stropping anyway. But in a situation when you want to keep skiving, perhaps a very long length on a bag panel, for example, you don't want to keep stopping and starting, you want to keep that going all the way along. It really does hold an edge, and it holds it very, very well. Build quality on it is also very good. It's not world class, but I wasn't expecting it to be. I think I paid around £55 to £60 for this delivered. So I'm not expecting a world class hand finishing on absolutely everything. It has a ferrule at the top here. This is brass, with a solid brass, and it's pressed in around what I assume is a boxwood handle. It's not naturally that dark. It seems to be some kind of stain and a shellac or French polish finish on the base. It might even be polyurethane, to be honest, but it feels quite brittle. So with regards to build quality, it's very, very good. It's also well finished. The steel is nice and smooth. It's not rough. And you'll notice the Blanchard logo, it's difficult to catch it in the light there, is actually, looks like it's been either laser engraved or etched on or something like that. I'm not too sure. But they haven't stamped it like they do on their regular skiving knives. I'm assuming that's because high-speed steel will probably start to ruin a metal stamp in a short order, I can imagine. So it's not stamped on this one. It's just etched by the looks of it. So the steel is very good. The quality is very good. It feels nicely finished. It's not rough. Obviously, it didn't come ready to go. It had a slight edge on it. You know, you would cut yourself on it, but it's more, you know, this is the suggested angle that, you know, we recommend that you sharpen it to, and it did take quite a while to get up. A regular skiving knife such as this one by Barnsley, this is I believe 1085 high carbon steel, so it has a little bit of flex to it if you press it hard enough, which is good for getting a nice low angle in certain circumstances. But the Rockwell hardness on that is, I believe, 55. So it doesn't take us long to bring an edge onto something that's going to be a little bit softer. Obviously, 1085 would be definitely softer than high-speed steel. I'm assuming M2 high-speed steel, but I could be wrong. Another thing that I like about this is it has a good width of blade. It's not too shallow. Some knives come with quite a narrow blade. This is about 1.5 inches, I believe, of blade width, so that you've got plenty to play with to get through some thick hide or repair larger areas of leather, for example. So it has a good width to it. It feels good in the hand too. It's a good size. And that's about it for pros. I mean, a skiving knife is a fairly simple affair, so there's not a lot to talk about really. The downsides to this knife, I found that the edges are a little bit rough. So however they've cut this out or stamped it, I'm not too sure. But the edges are actually very, very sharp. Not quite sharp enough to cut yourself on, but if you're pushing with your fingers or your thumb, it's not very comfortable. So what I've had to do to remedy that is just to very carefully go over the edge with a medium grit sandpaper, and then just finish off with a fine grit, just being very careful not to go right to the end there. And that has made it infinitely more comfortable. Another downside is the corner there. This is not quite a 45-degree angle like this skiving knife is, or probably 40 degrees maybe. But this isn't a very acute English style. So this is an ode to the English style maybe. But this corner will quite easily catch leather fibers as you're pushing it through if that corner comes close to the leather. And oftentimes, if you're going very, very shallow, it can do. So to remedy that, I've had to take it down to a diamond plate and then just curve that corner in very, very slightly. It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't need to be sharpened. All you're doing is just reducing the corner there. And then I just quickly polished it on a polishing block. But instead of catching the leather fibers now, the leather fibers just glide into the blade, so that's remedied that. So there's not really a lot to go wrong with it. You know, as I said before, they're pretty simple tools. So that's the pros and cons of it. Great steel. I think for the price, it's absolutely great value, but it's not necessarily an absolute beginner's blade. It does take some experience with sharpening stones, whether using whetstones, diamond plates, etc. And then the knowledge of how to strop it. But it's one of the few steels, in fact, where I don't always have to bring it back onto the green compound. So a lot of the softer steels, I will pretty much keep them on here every so often. I'll just buff them up. And this one, once it's gone shaving sharp, I can simply just buff it on a piece of leather. So it doesn't take much to maintain an edge, which is, you know, definitely a benefit for me on that one. So the last con, I would say, I haven't always been a big fan of handled skiving knives because you are limited to how low that you can go. Sometimes on the English paring knife, I like to have it level with the leather, and then I push the end into the leather. It compresses slightly and it takes off a very, very thin shaving. So in those circumstances, having a handle is a little bit detrimental. So you are limited on a paring stone to how low you can go. Now, of course, you can also bring the handle off the edge of the paring stone so that you can take the handle out of the equation completely. But then you've got nothing under your fingers or under the handle where you can kind of index the angle to. So you're essentially skiving blind. You're having to go by eye rather than go by feel. And I like to go by both if possible. So some skiving knives have been made where there is no handle at the bottom. It's the steel goes all the way up to the end, and then there's a handle on the top. So there's only one scale, or there's only one handle on one side. It's just all flat steel on the other. I believe Jeff Peachy makes those, who is a famous bookbinder. I would say that is a bit of a downside, but there is a reason to having a handle on a skiving knife. Now, traditionally, years ago, bookbinders would use this style and they would push forwards with it, and that would take off a very, very thin layer. If you wanted to skive, say, a heavier hide or something a little bit thicker, you would actually lead with the heel of the blade here rather than the tip. So the good thing about using the tip is you can have it almost parallel to the leather as you pare along, but the heel is a much steeper angle, and it can essentially take off, especially thick hides, a shaving all in one go. You don't have to go through several times. You can just do it all in one. It does require a higher degree of skill, but that is why Blanchard have included a handle on this one, so that you can hold onto the handle and you're actually pushing the blade through the leather. But when you're using the knife to push forwards, cutting mostly with the tip, then obviously you're not really using the handle at all. It's more just kind of in the way. So this is specifically for holding onto so that you can push through the leather, and that's something I'm going to demonstrate now. So here I have just a simple piece of veg tan, and we're going to skive off a section. So I'm going to say this section here, for example, and I'm just going to take off a small groove along here, and that's just going to help guide the blade through. It gives me something to kind of index to. So I'm going to take the Blanchard knife here, and I'm going to lead with the heel. So normally you would take your blade and you'd press it in here, and you'd have a slight angle on it as you're pushing through and you're taking off your piece. But in this instance, we're going to hold onto the handle as it was designed to do. And if you want to take off a very steep skive, you're going to lead with the heel, with the very tip of the heel here just protruding in front of the leather. If you want a shallower skive, you'll bring it further in, and closer to the tip is going to be a very shallow skive indeed, depending on the thickness of the leather. So we're going to go about here, and I'm keeping the edge of the paring knife against the stone, and I'm just going to push through. And you want to make sure that you're maintaining angles the entire time, because if you start cutting into the leather, it pulls the blade in, and there's very little that you can do about it at that point. So you want to go nice and slowly. just underskive there, so just go back. It's better to underskive than overskive. Like so. So that's how to push skive, and that's what the handle was designed for. So you're holding onto the handle like so and just using your fingers or however you feel more comfortable. And just make sure that you're maintaining that same angle. So these fingers are actually touching as I go through. So it's giving me a consistent depth. So just holding the leather, watching the front of the blade, because that's where we're guiding from. Once you get going, it's not so bad. So it gives you the option of going both ways. Now I must confess, this is a rather gnarly dry piece of veg tan. This is probably one of the worst examples that I could have picked out the drawer to skive with. But piece of lambskin here, on the other hand, is this is actually reasonably simple to skive, as long as it's not the belly section, which is a bit harder. So soft skins like goat skin, lamb skin, things like that, that are of a thinner nature. This is where the Blanchard knife really shines. With that 12-degree taper, it really severs those fibers very, very efficiently and very, very cleanly. Luckily, because it's high-speed steel, it also tackles veg tan quite well, but it really does take off a thin, thin layer. Just be aware this the handle does catch at the back sometimes, and it can raise your handle up, so you just have to be very wary of that. Taking off a clean piece here and doing it again. It just glides through the flesh side with relative ease. Taking off a multitude of layers. It's better to take off smaller layers and do several goes. So that is essentially the Blanchard high-speed steel edition knife in a nutshell. It has a very shallow angle, 12 degrees, so it's great for paring thin skins, but it's also of a high quality steel, which is perfect for going through vegetable tan leather and maintaining an edge. It also allows you to push skive if you want to. So this would be a very good example of something that could be very diverse in nature, going from fine leatherwork up to saddlery, and still be able to tackle all of it quite well. There are certain circumstances where I won't use this and I'll use a different type of skiving knife. I have a collection of them. I tend to use this the most, to be honest. After a few weeks of using it, I've come to like it very, very much. But there are different ones for different jobs. So it's not like it's going to do every job the best. There are some knives that I just find better for paring very, very thin skins, working on things like watch straps, going through very, very thick veg tan hide. I'll probably use a different knife for those things, but overall I'd say I do about 80% of my paring with this knife. So thank you for watching this tool review. If you did enjoy this tool review, please like, subscribe and share. And also we now have a forum on leathercraftmasterclass.com, so check that out. And if you have any questions or you have any input, or perhaps you have this knife and there are some other techniques that you'd like to go over, please feel free to share and join the forum. Thanks for watching.